So we're in the thick of the 2025 NBA playoffs, and it's been a crazy ride to say the least so far. So in the spirit of the playoffs, I figured I'd combine my 3 forgotten playoff performance episodes into one compilation video, just to make it easier to watch them all together. If you've already seen them separately, then you'll know what to expect, but if not, maybe you'll see something you forgot about. Alright, I'm out. There's been plenty of incredible playoff performances, which have rightfully gone down as both legendary and unforgettable. But there's even more which have been completely overlooked. So today we're back to take another deep dive into 5 of the more forgotten playoff performances in NBA history, starting with LaMarcus Aldridge in the first round of the 2014 playoffs. The 2006 NBA draft was kind to the Portland Trail Blazers, as they selected Brandon Roy and traded for LaMarcus Aldridge. And while Roy's career had come to a premature end, Aldridge had been a staple on the team for almost a decade, and now he had some help in second-year point guard Damian Lillard, as the 54 and 28 Blazers were making their first return to the playoffs since 2011, against a Houston Rockets team now featuring James Harden and Dwight Howard, a team that Aldridge had been dominating all season, as Rockets forward Terrence Jones was completely overmatched in most of their meetings. And while you knew that LaMarcus Aldridge could fill it up, he had also been dealing with back issues and missed a lot of games down the stretch, so you weren't sure if he'd be playing at 100%. But when Game 1 tipped off, LaMarcus Aldridge kicked off one of the greatest performances of his career. So Portland had come into Houston and stolen home court advantage with a 2-point win, and 31 points from Lillard played a big part in that. But when Aldridge saw Jones guarding him, he was thinking one thing.
That's barbecue chicken down there. Barbecue chicken.
And he knew it was time to get to work, starting with an impressive 12-point and 8-rebound first quarter. And while he had worked his way up to 16 points and 11 boards by halftime, he had also missed all 3 of his shots in the second. But by the end of the third, he was up to 24 points and 12 boards. Yet the Blazers were down by 6. And after 7 quick Rockets points to begin the fourth, Portland was in a 13-point hole. But then Aldridge took over, starting with a 3-pointer, then spending the rest of the quarter putting on a clinic and going 7 of 8 from the field for 19 points, with his final 2 points in the final seconds, sending the game to overtime.
And it's Matthews for the lead. No. Put back. No again. Tapped home.
And while he would foul out in the extra frame, the Blazers completed the comeback, and Aldridge had ended Game 1 with 46 points and 18 rebounds. But after barely escaping with a win, it didn't seem like they could get another win unless Aldridge again played out of his mind. So come Game 2, that's exactly what he did.
If he was on the playground, he would just scream rainbow. I mean, oh my goodness. Tell you what, when your mom's in the audience and you dropping jumpers like this, it's nothing better in the world.
Impressively, the Blazers had taken both in Houston, and Aldridge again poured in over 40 points, finishing another incredible performance with 43 points and 8 rebounds, and had done so while playing about 8 minutes less than he had in Game 1, making every shot count as he shot nearly 65% from the field. And without Aldridge, the game probably would have been over after the first quarter, as while Portland still trailed by 8 after 12 minutes, Aldridge had scored 11 of their 23 points, and would go on to score 12 in the second and 16 in the third, and would cap off another legendary performance with a huge fourth quarter dunk, as the Blazers were heading back to Portland up 2-0. But Game 3 came to an end, and the Rockets were right back in it with an overtime win. And Aldridge had struggled, as after getting off to a fast start in the first 2 games, he came out flat in Game 3, going 2 for 8 in the first half. And while he finished with 23 points and 10 boards, he shot just 8 of 22 from the field, and a 37-point performance from Harden was exactly what Houston needed to get back in the series. But Houston had also made some adjustments to deal with Aldridge, as while Aldridge wasn't the quickest, he was a technician down low, and had been using his solid frame and strength to get to his spots against the Houston forwards. So this game, Houston would put bigger bodies on him, in Dwight Howard and Omer Ashik, and clearly it affected Aldridge. And after their Game 3 win, James Harden would say that the pressure was now on the Blazers going into Game 4. And if that was the case, could Portland handle it? Well, yeah, it looks like they could. as Portland finally broke the seal in Game 4 and became the first team to win at home in this series. But just like the 3 games before it, it had been a battle, as it was the 3rd game in the series to go to overtime. Aldridge had a modest first half, scoring 10 points, as the Blazers had fallen behind by 10 at the break. But a 13-point third quarter from Aldridge helped them cut that lead in half. Then while he took just 2 shots in the 4th, it was an all-around team performance, with 7 Blazers scoring in the final quarter, and a Nick Batum 3-pointer with 5 minutes left gave Portland their first lead since early in the first. But a last-second Dwight Howard dunk would lead to overtime. And while Aldridge missed 2 crucial free throws, some of the less heralded Blazers came through to help Portland hold on, and Aldridge finished with an efficient 29 points and 10 rebounds, as he and Lillard were in sync on the offensive end. And on defense, Aldridge even rejected 4 shots, and now the Blazers were heading back to Houston with a chance to close it out. But when Portland needed him most, Aldridge went missing, turning in his worst game of the series by far. But it was a mixture of things. Houston showed from the beginning that if they lost, it wouldn't be because of Aldridge, as from the jump, they were sending double teams at him. But Aldridge also picked up 2 first-quarter fouls, and when he got back in the game, he couldn't find his rhythm against an aggressive Rockets defense, hitting just 3 of his 12 shot attempts and finishing with 8 points and 8 rebounds, with one positive being his 2nd straight game with 4 blocks. And while the Blazers still had a game on the Rockets, they had lost by double digits. So now Houston had some momentum going back to Portland. But let's pick up late in Game 6, a freeze frame we've all seen and already know how it's going to end. But number 12 is a big reason why the game is this close. Yeah, Lillard has had the most efficient game, shooting over 50%, while hitting 5 threes up to this point. But the Blazers' leading scorer is Aldridge, as while he had gone cold in the 4th, his 30 points in the first 3 quarters helped keep Portland in it, while leading all players with 13 rebounds. And he had drained all 10 of his free throws. As this series was about to wrap up, with Aldridge averaging nearly 30 points and 11 rebounds, and completely carrying Portland to a 2-0 lead to begin the series. And for a guy who wasn't much of a shot blocker, he had averaged nearly 3 over the 6 games. But really quick, let's just get this out of the way.
It's Lillard. He got the shot off. Lillard, good! And the Blazers win the series!
So there it is. Damian Lillard wins it. The first signature moment of his career. And unfortunately, a single moment that has overshadowed an all-time performance from Aldridge, as he led his Blazers out of the first round for the first time in 15 years. But while Aldridge was expected to be a focal point in this series, let's check out a player who took everyone by surprise. By the 02-03 NBA season, Troy Hudson was on his 4th team. But after a career year the season before with Orlando, he had gotten a multi-year deal from the Timberwolves, and had improved on last season as Minnesota's starting point guard this entire year. And while Minnesota had an MVP candidate in Kevin Garnett, when the Wolves drew the 3-time defending champion Lakers in round 1 of the playoffs, it definitely looked like it was going to be an uphill battle. And that looked to be confirmed after the Lakers came into Minnesota in Game 1 and routed the T-Wolves. But Hudson had finished with 17 points, albeit on subpar shooting. But then Game 2 happened, and all of a sudden, Troy Hudson made it a series.
Another Los Angeles turnover. 4-on-2. Hudson takes it himself. And Hudson the other way for the Timberwolves. From here on loose.
And that's good, and I'm sure this makes Saunders very happy.
Hudson! Troy Hudson has gone mad!
I mean, Kobe's got 28 shots, 27.
Troy Hudson has put in 37 points. That is a game high.
So it was another blowout, but this time it was in Minnesota's favor, and the Wolves had Hudson to thank for that, as Hudson came out hot in the first quarter, and then hit a first-half buzzer beater to put the Wolves up by 16 heading into the break. And he just kept it going, making over 50% of his shots and draining 4 3-pointers, as he finished with a game and postseason career-high 37 points. And it was because he came out aggressive, and later acknowledged that good things happen when he plays like that. But he also knew when to give the ball up, as he would dish 10 assists in the process, But this is what the Wolves needed, as their usual second option Wally Szczerbiak was expending most of his energy trying to contain Kobe Bryant, so they needed their scoring from somewhere else. And while games like this weren't uncommon for Hudson, as he was known as a streaky shooter, the only question was if the streak could continue. But hold on, back in LA, the Wolves outlasted the Lakers in overtime and had pulled that off without Garnett for basically the whole overtime period. But how did they even get to that point? Well, it was pretty close throughout, and while Garnett kept playing MVP level ball, Hudson was pouring in the points, as he finished this game with 27 and cashed in on all 8 of his free throws. But after LA fought back to tie it late, Hudson's potential game winner didn't fall, and while Hudson missed all of his shots in overtime, he still hit his 4 free throws, including 2 in the final seconds to ice the game, as the Wolves had taken a surprising 2-1 lead. And now going into Game 4, Lakers coach Phil Jackson admitted that they still hadn't figured out a way to get into Hudson, and essentially that he was abusing their defense in the pick and roll game, using that one play to get any shot he wanted. And that continued to ring true in Game 4, as Hudson was making his shots and was scoring great over the first 3 quarters, as he was also the Wolves' best 3-point shooter throughout the game. And going into the 4th, the Wolves were up by 3, but to begin the quarter, Hudson was on the bench, seemingly to get him fresher for when they needed him down the stretch. Except he didn't get back into the game until there was only about 6 minutes left, and over the rest of the game, the hot-handed Hudson got just 2 shot attempts and missed them both, as Minnesota would understandably put the game in Garnett's hands. Yet it was still surprising that Hudson had spent that much time on the bench. Yet he did still finish with 28 points. But with Kobe living at the free throw line in the 4th, the Lakers retook the lead and tied the series, heading back to Minnesota. So now Hudson was an X factor to the Wolves' success, but he came back down to earth in Game 5, as the Lakers put together a dominant offensive performance and won by 30. And after scoring 92 points over the last 3 games, Hudson would manage just 14 points this game, which all came in the first half, as second half double teams neutralized Hudson. And while he did add 7 assists, the reason Troy Hudson was on the court was to get your team points. But now the series was on the line, heading back to LA, and fans hoped that Hudson had another Game 2 in him. And did it ever look like he did after the first quarter, with Hudson dropping 14 points in the opening frame and leading Minnesota to a 5-point lead? But that was really all that Minnesota got from Hudson, as he would score 4 points the rest of the game. Yet his 18 points would still tie with Garnett for the team lead. But against the Lakers, that wasn't going to cut it, as the series ended in LA. So while it hadn't ended in victory, Troy Hudson had taken it to the defending champs, putting up one of the best stretches of his career and making sure that the Timberwolves made it a series. And for the rest of his life, he can tell the story of when the Los Angeles Lakers dynasty had no answer for him. But now let's take a trip back in time and look at a lesser talked about series with a theme we all love: revenge. Dale Ellis spent the first 3 years of his career with the Dallas Mavericks, understandably stuck behind Mark Aguirre and Rolando Blackman. But after a solid rookie season, he showed slight improvement in year 2. So when his minutes were cut in year 3, he was likely getting frustrated. But during that summer, he got out of Dallas via trade, joining the Seattle Supersonics and forming one of the league's best trios alongside Tom Chambers and Xavier McDaniel, while becoming a top 10 scorer in the NBA and winning Most Improved Player. And at 39-43, the Sonics squeaked into the playoffs, and as fate would have it, round 1 would put them against the heavily favored Mavs, a team who had had absolutely no problem versus Seattle during the regular season, winning each of their 5 matchups by double digits. But the Sonics were still confident, and Dale Ellis obviously had some extra motivation, taking on his old team. But then Mavs coach Dick Motta added a little more fuel to the fire, saying that Ellis could never replace Mavs star Rolando Blackman. So all that was left for Ellis was to let his play do the talking. And Ellis would do that to a degree in Game 1, putting up an efficient 22 points, yet being overshadowed by a 35-point performance from Chambers. But it didn't matter, since Seattle allowed 151 points in a blowout loss, so the series looked like it would eventually end with Dallas on top. Except now it's tied. It was a close one, but a win's a win, and it's one that wouldn't have happened without Ellis. After his 22-point Game 1, he put up 32 in Game 2, and it was a complete performance, as he added 6 rebounds and 6 assists. But in the final seconds, the game was tied, until Ellis was fouled, and as he would say, as soon as he knew he was going to the line, he knew it was over, draining both free throws to cap off a 10-point fourth quarter, as Seattle had stolen one in Dallas. Yet while it was a great offensive showing from Seattle, they also hadn't done much to slow down Dallas. So while this one did go in the win column, it hadn't been overly convincing, but the Sonics were hoping that they'd get another 32-point outing from Ellis back in Seattle. However, they wouldn't get 32 from Ellis in Game 3. No, they'd get 43. Ellis was unconscious, hitting nearly 65% of his shots, as everything had went perfectly to plan, with Ellis getting to all his spots and showing his knockdown shooting ability all game. But he also just looked like he wanted it more. As with Dallas big man James Donaldson hobbled from a leg injury, Ellis took advantage and swooped in for a game-high 14 rebounds, with 8 of those coming on the offensive glass. And with Ellis scoring 22 first-half points, Seattle got out to a huge lead by the break. Then even though Dallas outscored them in the third and fourth quarter, Seattle's lead was big enough that they still made it out with a double-digit victory. And now a lot of people were believing that they could actually beat this team. And that's what Ellis had his eyes set on. Game 4 would be Ellis's quietest, as while he made over 50% of his shots, he only scored 21 points, as Dallas was making sure not to let him have another huge night. Yet although I haven't really mentioned them, the other 2 members of the trio, in McDaniel and Chambers, had been doing their thing all series as well, and would combine for 60 points in Game 4. And the series was over, as Seattle hadn't just beat Dallas, they had humiliated them, with their defense being the most surprising element, as they had pushed Mavs star Mark Aguirre out to the perimeter and held him to just 13 points. So Dale Ellis had gotten his revenge on his former team, and especially on Dick Motta. And while Blackman had nothing to do with Motta's earlier comments regarding Ellis and Blackman, Ellis still made sure to outplay his former teammate, as Dale Ellis had just turned in the greatest playoff series of his career, for a Sonics team who made a Cinderella run to the conference finals in '87. But now let's jump ahead and check out a guy who also upset the Dallas Mavericks in the playoffs. But that's not the series we're going to look at. While Baron Davis's role on the We Believe Warriors is probably his most well-known, 5 years earlier he had an incredible first-round series versus Orlando that doesn't get mentioned as often. Davis was coming off his first career All-Star selection, and with a win in the season finale, the Hornets had clinched home court advantage for their first-round series against a Tracy McGrady-led Orlando Magic team. And while McGrady had a great series in his own right, Davis was doing everything for the Hornets, and was doing it with a heavy heart, as his grandmother was recovering from a stroke. Going into Game 1, Davis hadn't drawn the easiest assignment, as while the Magic's starting point guard was Darrell Armstrong, the 6'8" McGrady would say that he was planning to guard the 6'3" Davis for the series. So let's see how he'd fare with the height disadvantage. And while it definitely wasn't pretty, the Hornets had somehow ended Game 1 with a lead in the series. And it was pretty much because of Davis. Orlando had led for the whole game, and entered the fourth quarter with an 11-point lead. But after putting up just 8 points in the first half, Davis dropped 10 in both the third and fourth quarters, while also adding 7 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 steals. And the final steal would save the game.
It dropped to McGrady, picked up by Lynch.
With Davis knocking it away from McGrady in the final seconds to make up for an earlier turnover. But it was still going to be an uphill battle, as the Hornets' Jamal Mashburn had left the game in the final minutes and would not return for the series. So Davis had a lot on his shoulders going into Game 2. But Game 2 was a disappointment. Outside of a great performance from Eldon Campbell, the Hornets were having trouble getting their shots to fall, and that applied to Davis as well. In his defense, he was dealing with back spasms that affected his explosiveness. But by halftime, he had 4 points and had made just 1 of his 4 shots, and the Hornets were down big. But they did fight back in the second half and Davis even went for 7 points and 7 assists in the fourth quarter, as the Hornets would force overtime. But the Hornets had gone 1 of 12 from the field in the extra period, and while Davis still put up 11 points and 10 assists, Orlando had tied the series. And if Davis's back continued bothering him, the Hornets didn't have much of a chance. Okay, so here we are at the end of Game 3, 0.7 seconds, and the Hornets seemingly having a chance to win the game. But let's look at what Davis did to get them to this point. So first of all, it was more than back spasms, as he had been diagnosed with a back strain, which makes his Game 3 performance even more impressive. Mostly because all he did up to this point was put up 24 points, 11 rebounds, and 9 assists, while adding a couple steals and committing 0 turnovers. So it was already a career game, and it should have ended in regulation. So let's roll it really quick.
Davis at the buzzer! No! It's waved off! Bernie Fryer says no, it will not count!
There it is. A pretty obvious game-winning three-pointer by Davis. But hold on. The refs waved it off? It seems pretty clear that he made it, but the refs said no, as apparently it just wasn't possible for Davis to catch and get the shot off in 0.7 of a second. And at this time, the refs say was final say, as there was no instant replay review. But this would actually be one of the specific shots that led to the league adopting instant replay review beginning in the following season. But now this game had to go to overtime. But no worries, in front of the Orlando crowd, Davis dropped 9 points in the overtime period, while McGrady went scoreless, as Davis's final stat line saw him finish with 33 points, 14 rebounds, and 10 assists, and the Hornets were 1 win away from the second round. And going into Game 4, McGrady had been stripped of defensive duties on Davis after giving up the triple-double, and while he would guarantee that there would be a Game 5, he didn't exactly sound confident about it. Yet he did sound confident in saying he was the best player in the series, and was better than Baron Davis. But Davis wasn't stressing, and even though he would say that he didn't have to prove anything, his play in Game 4 said otherwise. Oh wait, a triple-double? This must be a Game 3 headline. Nope, this is from Game 4. Davis had turned in his second consecutive triple-double. This time it was 28 points, 11 rebounds, and 10 assists, while adding 3 steals. And Davis had only needed regulation to get it, as Charlotte took Game 4 in a blowout, with a 10-point third quarter from Davis helping stave off an Orlando comeback attempt, with Charlotte going on to run away with it in the fourth, as Davis had nearly averaged a triple-double for the series, while adding almost 3 steals per game. And in a display of toughness, even with his back issues, he averaged over 46.5 minutes a night, as this had wrapped up one of the best playoff performances from one of the most underrated playoff performers. And now to end it off, we'll check out a former teammate of Davis's, who had something to prove going into a 1998 second-round series. Eddie Jones had been a good swingman for the Lakers since entering the league in 1994, but by 1998, the team had big expectations, as they now had the league's most dominant player in Shaquille O'Neal, and Jones had a second-year guard breathing down his neck. But the Lakers had won 61 games this year, and were definitely contenders. But Jones had been underwhelming in the playoffs, as he had struggled in last year's second-round loss to Utah, and hadn't fared much better this year in LA's first-round win over Portland. So going into their semifinals matchup with a 61-win Seattle Supersonics team, Jones needed to show something, but it wasn't looking good after Game 1, with Gary Payton holding Jones to 9 points on 3 of 10 shooting, and the Lakers suffering an embarrassing loss to the Sonics, with Jones and Bryant seeming visibly frustrated with each other at certain points. And overall, the entire Lakers backcourt was looking rough. But luckily, in Game 2, Eddie Jones came to life. So for the second straight game, the Lakers' top-ranked offense only managed 92 points. But this time it was okay, because their defense completely shut Seattle down. And with Kobe missing the game with the flu, Jones found his flow in the offense, and the shots were falling. As while Shaq led the team with 26 points, Jones was right behind him, with a playoff career-high 23 points on 7 of 13 shooting. And the man recently named second-team All-Defense also helped hold Gary Payton to 12 points on about 35% shooting. And all of a sudden, the Lakers were in a great spot, heading home with the series tied. The Lakers were still without Kobe in Game 3, but they had nothing to worry about, because Eddie Jones had found his shot in Game 2, and now he couldn't miss, as he set a new postseason career high with 29 points, and did so on 12 of 17 shooting, while draining 4 threes. As with the Sonics rightfully putting most of their defensive attention in Shaq, Jones was ready for the kickouts, and he would continue proving his all-defensive status with 4 blocks. And his huge 20-point first half was the reason that the Lakers held a lead at the break, a lead which they just built on in the second half, as they took a 2-1 lead. And with a couple good performances from Jones, he finally looked to be shedding his reputation as a poor playoff performer. And Shaq looked to finally have some postseason help. But with Kobe back for Game 4, could Jones keep it going? And the answer to that is absolutely. But to be fair, Kobe only played about 3 minutes, but Jones played about 43. And for the third consecutive game, he set a new playoff career high, with 32 points on about 57% shooting. And while last game had been a block party for Jones, he became a thief in this one, finishing with 4 steals. And the Lakers won another game convincingly, as their Game 1 loss was looking more and more like an outlier. And all they had to do was take care of business one more time on the road, and they'd be returning to the conference finals for the first time since the Showtime days. Lakers coach Del Harris kept going with the hot hand in Game 5, as Bryant only got about 11 minutes, with a good portion of those minutes coming when the game was out of reach, which was pretty early, as the Lakers got out to a 17-point first quarter lead. Jones wasn't able to continue his string of playoff scoring highs, as he finished with just 17 in this game, but still shot 50% and went 7 of 7 from the free throw line in the fourth quarter alone. And he remained an X factor on defense, as although Gary Payton had 20 points, he needed 16 shots to get it, as the Lakers wrapped up their 4th straight win with ease and were advancing to take on Utah. And if you're wondering why Jones suddenly became so aggressive, you can give the credit to his mom, who didn't like the way people were talking about him during the Lakers' first round series. But the playoffs ended with the Lakers being swept by the Jazz, and Jones would be traded away during the following season. But he was still a big part in the Lakers returning to the conference finals, and would go on to have some great years after leaving LA. And I think that's where we'll end it off, on another deep dive into some forgotten playoff performances. Let me know what you think in the comments, what you liked and what you didn't, and maybe some future suggestions. But for now, thanks for checking out the video, subscribe if you're new, and if you haven't already, take a look at the first installment of this series. See you next time. So today, we're going to try something new and take a deep dive into 5 of the more forgotten playoff performances in NBA history, starting with Michael Redd in the first round of the 06 playoffs. In the summer of 05, Michael Redd had signed a huge deal with Milwaukee, and this season saw him fully come into his own and prove he was worth every penny, while willing his Milwaukee Bucks to 40 wins, which got them the 8th and final spot in the East. And all they had to do was get through the 2-time defending conference champion Detroit Pistons. But it was their own fault. They had lost the season finale to the Washington Wizards, but if they had won that game, they would have instead been the 5th seed, taking on the Cleveland Cavaliers in round 1. Then with Chicago and Indiana both winning their games, the Bucks fell to 8th. But what's done is done, and the Bucks knew that they had nothing to lose going into the series with the 64-win Pistons. And while these mid-2000s Pistons possessed one of the greatest defenses of all time, they knew that Redd could hurt them. And he had, as he had averaged 30 points over their 4 regular season meetings, and had been lights out from beyond the arc. And that's saying a lot, as the Pistons were a team who only allowed about 90 points to opponents. But enough talking, let's get to the series. And that's not a good start. But it's not really a surprise either. The Pistons stuck to their game plan and made every shot difficult for Redd, because they could, as Milwaukee didn't have much for shot creators outside of Redd. So Detroit just sent the house and chased him off the 3-point line as much as possible, as he had just 1 long-range attempt and missed it. And 11 points from your star player just isn't going to cut it. And honestly, the Bucks' only hope was for Red to play some of the best basketball of his career going forward. But maybe things would be a little easier on Red, as Richard Hamilton had tweaked his ankle in Game 1 and wouldn't be 100%. Which may mean less or more of the grabbing that the Bucks were complaining about after Game 1. But either way, Milwaukee planned to combat this physical play with physical play of their own, in setting more screens. But Game 2 comes and goes, and it's another double-digit loss for the Bucks. However, it's a little different this time. The Bucks nearly dropped 100 points, and Red was responsible for 29 of those, looking a lot more like he did versus the Pistons in the regular season. But the defense-oriented Pistons got rolling on offense, as 6 players scored in double figures. And if they kept up that kind of play, then the Bucks really had no chance. But for now, the Pistons hadn't done anything except take care of business at home, with the series heading back to Milwaukee.
Bucks looking for numbers. They've got it. It's a 3-on-2. Red on the move. 1-1. Red and Ford. Red.
But look at that. There's signs of life. And Red had resurrected the Bucks' chances in the series, as after a 14 of 21 shooting performance with 4 3-pointers, Red had dropped 40 points on the Pistons. And I don't think the Pistons were happy about this, as it seemed like Red had even gotten under Richard Hamilton's skin a little bit. But it wasn't just Red, as point guard TJ Ford would dish 15 assists, and the bench would produce 47 points, with third-year guard Mo Williams exploding, with 20 points, while missing just 1 of 10 shots. And after Ben Wallace picked up 2 early fouls, the Pistons had to tone down the aggressiveness. And Milwaukee had played their game, and hit more 3-pointers than the first 2 games combined, but had also gone away from their aggressive approach on the offensive glass, to limit Detroit's transition opportunities. So had Milwaukee figured out Detroit? Or did they get lucky from a perfect performance from Michael Red? Whatever the answer is, Red had a pretty good follow-up performance in Game 4, with a team-high 33 points. But the Bucks had taken just 10 threes, with half of these being Red's, even though he only made 1. But with 15 free throw attempts, it made sense to shy away from the deep ball. And while it was another double-digit loss, the Bucks had actually gone to the 4th with a lead, after TJ Ford had poured in 16 third-quarter points. But fourth-quarter foul trouble neutralized him, and a free throw off between Red and Billups saw Billups come out on top, while living up to his Mr. Big Shot nickname. And a game which at one point was winnable for the Bucks had now ended, with Milwaukee's back against the wall. But still, Red had scored 73 points over the last 2 games, and was averaging over 33 points since Game 1. So maybe he could will the Bucks to see another day. Unfortunately, yet not really surprisingly, the answer to that is no. But it wasn't for lack of trying, as Red had 23 points and 8 offensive rebounds. But he still did what the Pistons wanted him to do, attempting just 1 deep ball all game. But it was basically over before it started, as Red had just 2 points in a first quarter, which saw Milwaukee fall behind by 16, and Rip Hamilton would get his revenge for Game 3, with 40 points of his own, as Milwaukee had given up 122 points in a blowout loss. So yeah, there wasn't really anyone who had picked the Bucks to win, but Michael Red actually made the Pistons sweat a bit, with the best playoff series of his career by far, but also his last. But now let's take a look at a Milwaukee Buck who won his first round playoff series, and did something that no one else in NBA history could do. After 2 losing seasons with the San Diego Clippers to begin his career, Terry Cummings was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks, going into the 84-85 season, where he would immediately excel, finishing the year as an MVP candidate, as the Bucks ended the year as the 2 seed in the East, and would get matched up with a Chicago Bulls team, led by their star rookie. But it turned out that that rookie was relieved, as this was the matchup that he wanted. But Jordan might have been reconsidering that stance, as after he came out on fire in the first half of Game 1 with 19 points, the Bucks stifled him in the second, allowing just 4 more points from the star. And while Sidney Moncrief stole the show in Game 1 with 30 points on the offensive end, while frustrating Jordan on defense, Cummings had chipped in an efficient 22 points in a good win for the team, as the postseason had gotten off to a good start for the Bucks. But come Game 2, Cummings would really come alive. So with a great performance from Cummings, the Bucks had taken a 2-0 lead. But going into the fourth, Cummings only had 14 points, and the Bucks only had a 3-point lead. But they ultimately would win by 7. So how did they stave off the Bulls? Pretty simple actually. Cummings dropped 16 in the final frame to keep the Bucks ahead and finished tied with Jordan with a game-high 30 points. As Cummings had made it crystal clear, he just wanted the ball. And with 11 rebounds to his name, it was a performance to be proud of, as now the Chicago-born Cummings was heading to his hometown for Game 3. So the Bulls made sure that they weren't going to be swept, winning Game 3 by a single basket, as Jordan and forward Orlando Woolridge combined for 63 points. But not to be outdone were Cummings and Moncrief, as they combined for 65 points. However, the Bucks got little offense from the rest of the team, and although it came in a losing effort, Cummings had poured in 37 points on 15 of 20 shooting. But the Bucks did have a chance to win the game late. Yet Ricky Pierce had his shot blocked, and after the game, the Bulls' Dave Greenwood was more than relieved that Cummings hadn't taken the shot. And that's because he was supposed to, as the potential game-winning play had been drawn up for Cummings. But when Cummings couldn't get himself free for the alley-oop pass, it forced Moncrief to throw it anyway, which led to a Bulls steal and a Bucks loss. But Milwaukee had to put that in the past with Game 4 coming up. And now the series had kind of just turned into a one-up contest between Cummings and Jordan.
Here's Pierce, a 2-on-1, Cummings gets the hook. You saw with a 10-rebound advantage. Cummings will shoot it over Green. Get right here. Cummings shoots over Greenwood. Oh, man.
But in Game 4, neither one of them would up the other, each leading their teams with 29 points. But Cummings hadn't really taken care of the ball, committing 8 turnovers. But this is where the Bucks showed that they were just the better team, with 3 guys scoring at least 20. But it was Cummings who took them home, as after missing 2 key free throws, he would make his final 6, all coming within the final 32 seconds of the game, to put it out of reach and secure them their 3rd win, to advance to the 2nd round to take on Philly. But the Bucks would go down quietly in the 2nd round series. But Cummings had still accomplished something in the 1st round series that no one else would do in NBA history, which is outscore Michael Jordan in a playoff series. But let's get out of the 1st round and jump almost 20 years ahead to a Western Conference semifinals matchup. A now 10-year pro Nick Van Exel had just finished his first full season with the Dallas Mavericks, after being traded to Dallas at the deadline last year. And this season had seen him act as one of the league's best 6th men, with him playing quite well in a 1st round series with Portland, which almost saw Dallas blow a 3-0 lead. But they survived, and were now set to take on the Kings. The same Kings who had pushed the defending champion Lakers to 7 games last season. And Dallas would need Van Exel to be one of their key contributors. But after Game 1, it wasn't looking good for Dallas. The Kings had come into their house and beaten them by double digits. But Van Exel had kicked off the series with an impressive 20 points off the bench, as one of 4 Dallas scorers to drop at least 18. But it was discouraging, because Dallas had played a great game. It was just that Sacramento played better. But Van Exel also felt that the Mavs were giving the Kings too much respect. So I guess that means that Van Exel would play disrespectfully for the rest of the series. So the Mavs won Game 2 easily. They were on their way to a win anyway, but it was all but guaranteed when Chris Webber went down in the 3rd quarter. Diagnosis? A torn meniscus, and out for the series. So now the Mavs had no excuse not to make it through the Kings. Oh, and I guess I haven't mentioned yet that Van Exel did play disrespectfully, exploding in the 1st half by dropping 19 points on 8 of 9 shooting off the bench, as Dallas put up 83 points before the break. Then while Van Exel wasn't really needed in the 2nd half, he still added another 17 to bring his game-high total to 36 points, with the Mavs evening the series. And Van Exel wasn't forcing these scoring outbursts. He had to do this, with Michael Finley having struggled the entire postseason so far. So Nick Van Exel was now the X factor, and if the Mavs followed his lead, they liked their chances.
he can make that little jump one. And Exel. We wanted to send them our best as well. This is for the tie. It is a Van Exel 3.
The last thing you'd want to do was give Van Exel extra motivation. But playing in front of a hostile Kings crowd only seemed to make him better. And this game was an instant classic. Van Exel had dropped an impressive 15 points in the first half. Then he led all Mavs scorers with 17 in the second half, as the Mavs were down 2, with regulation about to end. But Van Exel decided that he wanted to play a little bit longer.
Van Exel will. 7 to shoot. Van Exel in the lane for the tie. He got it. Timeout Sacramento.
So his incredible shot would force overtime. But it seemed like he had used up all his offense in regulation, after failing to record a shot attempt in the first overtime. But the teams were still tied. And Van Exel left it all out there in the second OT.
Hey, look at that Van Exel snarl.
Mike Bibby had said that he wasn't going to let Nick Van Exel replicate his 36-point outing. But early in the second OT, Bibby fouled Van Exel, leading to a 3-point play. So now Van Exel was at 35, and Bibby was on the bench, as he had fouled out. Then after one more 3-pointer and a couple late free throws, Van Exel finished with 40, and the Mavs finished with a 2-1 lead, as everyone was hoping that Van Exel would keep his hot hand. But he went ice cold in Game 4, draining 2 of 11 shots and finishing with 5 points, and just not showing the effort or the urgency needed in a playoff series. But in his defense, no one on the Mavericks could get the lid off the basket, and the series was again tied, heading back to Dallas. So Game 5 wouldn't be 40 points, but you were definitely a lot happier when Van Exel put up 18. And with Steve Nash beautifully directing the offense, all the Mavs starters plus Van Exel scored in double figures. And the Mavs rebounded from a poor first quarter to completely run away with it in the second half, with Van Exel scoring 13 of his 18 in the final 24 minutes. And now the Mavs were 1 win away from their second conference finals appearance in franchise history. But there they were again, putting their fans through every emotion in a disappointing Game 6 loss. Van Exel tried to save them with 35 points and 5 made threes. But with Dirk and Michael Finley going scoreless from the field in the fourth quarter, the Kings were able to hold on to their lead and force a do-or-die Game 7. And Van Exel knew that they had let an opportunity slip away, and that they couldn't let it happen again. And it looked like they were heading to disappointment, with most of the Mavs starters struggling in the first half. But Van Exel did what a sixth man is supposed to, scoring 15 points by halftime as Dallas held a 5-point lead. Then with Finley and Nash heating up in the second half, Dallas would pull away, and the Mavs had finally broken through to the conference finals. And while these Mavs are often remembered for their big three, Nick Van Exel gave an MVP performance, and may have very well saved a legacy or two during this postseason. And now let's look at another guy who was nearing the end of his career when he chose to light it up in the playoffs. It's Game 1 of the 1997 Western Conference First Round Series between Phoenix and the defending conference champion Seattle Supersonics. And while 9-year pro Rex Chapman has always been a guy who could fill it up, no one was expecting what he would do in this game. Chapman had spent the season with Phoenix, working his way into an important role as part of a talented guard rotation, which included Jason Kidd and Kevin Johnson, as the Suns were now set to take on a high-powered Sonics team. And great guard play was the Suns' only hope. But with Johnson and Kidd struggling to find their shot, Boy Wonder came to the rescue. Chapman had a slow start, making just 1 of 4 threes in the first. But in the second, it was 4 up, 4 down, as he was up to 22 points by halftime. Then with 9 points in the second and 11 in the third, while adding 4 more threes, Chapman had set a playoff career high and NBA playoff record with 9 3-pointers, en route to an incredible 42 points. And his final 3 with 55 seconds left put the game out of reach, as Phoenix stole one in Seattle. However, even though Kidd and Johnson weren't scoring, the ability those two had to penetrate to the hoop at will is why Chapman continued getting open looks, even if he was red hot. And with Kidd playing hounding defense on the Sonics' Gary Payton, Seattle knew that they had a battle in store for them. And Chapman knew that the Sonics weren't going to take it easy either and come out hard in Game 2. And he was right. But he was the only Sun that looked even a little prepared for that. Johnson and Kidd combined to shoot 1 of 19 from the field. And while Chapman again led the Suns in scoring, his 18 points was a far cry from 42. But 50 points still wouldn't have mattered, with the Sonics recording one of the most lopsided playoff victories in NBA history. But at least the Suns had stolen one in Seattle. Chapman finally had some help on the offensive end in Game 3, as Johnson would go for 22 points, and Wes Person dropped a team-high 28 off the bench. But the Suns' most consistent offensive producer remained Chapman, as he dropped 23 points. And with the Suns going to the fourth quarter, up by just 1, Chapman's 12 points in the final frame helped them pull ahead and stay ahead, as the favored Sonics were on the brink of elimination, with no answer for Rex Chapman. And at this point it was clear that Phoenix was going to try and beat the Sonics with small ball, and with slower and older guys like Detlef Schrempf, Sam Perkins, and especially a 35-year-old Terry Cummings on a surgically repaired knee, playing big minutes for the Sonics, the small ball approach was genius. But now Kevin Johnson was playing with a bad ankle, and Game 4 started poorly for the entire Suns team. But in the second half, things turned around. Kidd's defense on Payton hurt the Sonics offense, and Chapman hurt them on defense, as after going 1 for 8 in the first half, he went 8 for 13 in the second half, hitting 4 threes and scoring 20 points. But his final 3 of regulation was one that he'll never forget.
Chapman for the tie.
So Chapman's off-balance running 3 sent the game to overtime, but Phoenix went ice cold in the extra frame, and the Sonics survived. And after the game, Hersey Hawkins would put it best, as no one was willing to roll over in the series. But the Suns still needed one more win, except now it had to come on the road. So the Suns went full small ball in Game 5 by starting Person, but this move led to them having no firepower off the bench. And with KJ continuing to struggle, it was going to be an uphill battle for the Suns, especially after falling behind by 22 in the first half. But they weren't coming back from this, and Chapman would close out his season with a modest 16-point performance. So while the Suns fell short, they wouldn't have gotten as close as they did if not for an incredible series from Chapman. And while his overall performance might be forgotten, that Game 4 shot will live on forever. But now let's go to our last player, who actually spent a little time on that 97 Suns team. The 1995 NBA Finals, a battle of giants. Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon versus Superman, Shaquille O'Neal. And with other names like Clyde Drexler and Penny Hardaway taking the court, the spotlights were fixed, but a third-year Robert Horry quietly put together one of the best all-around series, and especially finals, of all time. Horry had already been playing well throughout the playoffs, and was only getting better as the Rockets went further, but his finals performance would warrant MVP consideration. He would kick off Game 1 by stuffing the stat sheet, with 19 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists. But his two-way play was what set him apart, as Horry would even outpace Hakeem in both steals and blocks. Oh, and unsurprisingly, he was clutch, on both ends of the ball, as without him, the Rockets probably don't win Game 1. But Hakeem got the glory, as the Rockets would take a 1-0 lead. And just like that, the 6-seeded Rockets are up 2-0, and had done it more convincingly than in Game 1. And it was nothing crazy for Horry, with 11 points and 10 rebounds. But let's ask LeBron how many steals he had.
Not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7.
Okay, so it was actually 7, which was also a finals record, as Horry was responsible for 7 of the Magic's 16 turnovers. Oh yeah, and he added 2 blocks as well. But with Sam Cassell stealing the show, Horry's performance again gets overlooked. But the Magic had to get it together fast, before it was too late. And we pick up with about 15 seconds left in Game 3. Up to this point, Horry has 17 points, 9 rebounds, and 4 assists. Yet another all-around performance overshadowed, this time by great showings from the Rockets' aging Phi Slamma Jamma duo. But Horry made sure that the spotlight would shine over him at least once in this series. But really quick, let's look at this article from the Associated Press from right before the final series began. Interesting.
6. Horry for 3.
So Horry's three-pointer would put the Magic ahead for good, and Houston took a 3-0 lead. But Horry called it. Going back to that article, he said the three-point shot would be the difference maker. And sure, that's a given, but who cares? Horry called it. And with the Rockets having had completed a trade last season, which would have sent Horry to the Pistons for Sean Elliott, before medical concerns caused it to fall through, they were happier than ever that it didn't work out. And I haven't even mentioned the effect that he had on Horace Grant. As while Grant was an efficient offensive performer in this series, it was at a much smaller scale than it had been in some of Orlando's earlier series. And that was because of Horry. As not only did Horry exploit his mismatch on offense, with Grant not being a perimeter defender, he also just forced Grant to exert a lot more energy, making him less effective on offense. And the Rockets could close it out in Game 4. Yet while the win totals didn't show it, the Magic hadn't made this an easy series for Houston, and it was anyone's game going into the fourth quarter of Game 4. But the championship pedigree took over for Houston, as they pulled away, and Horry ended the game with 21 points and 13 boards, while draining 4 threes. And the 6-seeded Rockets were back-to-back champions, with some publications understandably believing that Robert Horry should be named MVP of the finals. And while Hakeem equally deserved the honor, you can't look at Horry's numbers and say they weren't MVP worthy. But as everyone knows, Robert Horry was just getting started. And I think that's where we'll end it off, on my first attempt at a deep dive into some forgotten playoff performances. Let me know what you think in the comments, what you liked and what you didn't. And maybe I can do it again sometime. But for now, thanks for checking out the video, subscribe if you're new, and take a look at the channel for plenty of deep dives into some forgotten players. See you next time. So today, we're back to take another deep dive into 5 of the more forgotten playoff performances in NBA history, starting with Anthony Johnson in the first round of the 2006 NBA playoffs. Anthony Johnson was a second-round pick by the Sacramento Kings in the 1997 NBA draft, and would be the definition of a journeyman throughout his career, changing teams 10 times over his 13 years in the NBA, and spending more than 2 seasons with a team just once. And that team was the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers signed the career backup prior to the 2003-04 season, and while he would remain a backup that year, the following season would see him spend a lot of time in the starting lineup, filling in for an injured Jamal Tinsley. It was the same story in 2006, with Johnson starting a career-high 53 games, and he was still the starter for Indiana's first-round matchup with the New Jersey Nets. While Johnson had just wrapped up one of the best years of his career, he was far from a focal point on a Pacers team with Jermaine O'Neal and Steven Jackson. Yet Johnson still had some extra incentive to perform, as he had spent 2 years with the Nets before joining the Pacers, and would now be going head-to-head with the future Hall of Fame point guard he used to back up. And in Game 1, he did everything you could ask for. Sure, he shot 3 of 10 from the field, but he added 6 assists and played inspired defense on Jason Kidd, helping limit the Nets guard to 2 of 11 shooting. As the game would go to overtime, with less than a second left, Johnson was fouled, and the veteran would calmly sink 2 free throws. The Pacers had stolen Game 1 on the road. Johnson had been around the block a few times. He knew that when you got an opportunity in the NBA, you had to step up, but it turned out that he was just getting started. Johnson knew that the Game 1 win didn't mean much, especially with the way the Pacers had played on the road this season. So in Game 2, Johnson came out and dropped 17 points, adding 6 rebounds and 4 steals. And while Kidd got his assists, Johnson again helped hold him to just 6 points. The problem with Johnson's 17 points is that he was Indiana's leading scorer on a night when they were held to just 75 total points. The Pacers were calling for better officiating, but the result was final. The Nets got the win, and the series was tied, heading back to Indiana. After 2 games, It had been a defensive battle between the teams. But back home for Game 3, Indiana went on the offensive, led by a monster 37-point performance from Jermaine O'Neal, which would cast a shadow over a career game from Anthony Johnson. Johnson was involved in some of those O'Neal points, as he dished a game-high 8 assists, and didn't turn the ball over once, but he was also responsible for quite a few points of his own. Johnson would drop 25 on 8 of 13 shooting, shattering his previous postseason high of 13 points. In fact, Johnson scored that many points in just the fourth quarter of Game 3, with Johnson echoing the same message that he was giving after Game 1. If you don't step up in the playoffs, then you're going home. And Indiana as a whole scored 107 points, the first and last time either team would score at least 100 points in this series. And when you score the most points, you win the game. The Pacers had recaptured the series lead. There would be no repeat performance from Johnson in Game 4. He didn't play terribly, he just didn't have the same impact, scoring 12 points and also committing 6 turnovers. And his Game 5 would look quite similar. He had a really solid 14, 6, and 4 stat line, along with 2 steals, but he missed 10 of his 15 shots. And against a great defensive team like the Nets were, Johnson needed to have Game 3 level performances if Indiana wanted to win. The games had been close, but New Jersey pulled it out both times. They had retaken the series lead, up 3-2, and now Indiana's back was against the wall. And with all of Johnson's earlier talk about stepping up, it was now or never going into Game 6. Johnson was scorching hot to begin the game, dropping 12 points in the first quarter. By halftime, he was up to 19 and had missed just 1 shot, with the teams tied as the third quarter began. Johnson played the entire quarter, yet he had a quieter 6 points. However, the Nets had only built a 4-point lead, and Johnson left it all out there in the fourth. He scored Indiana's first 12 points of the quarter, doing everything he could to keep his team alive. The Pacers scored 21 total points in the fourth. Johnson was responsible for 15 of them, shattering his postseason career high set just a week earlier, as he finished with 40 points. A true man of his word, according to Jason Kidd. Johnson had stepped up, the rest of the Pacers hadn't, and New Jersey was able to protect their lead, winning the game and the series. It hadn't ended how he wanted it to, but Anthony Johnson did exactly what he said he'd do. He stepped up in the postseason, turning in the best playoff series of his career. And what did it get him? It got him traded to Dallas in the offseason, 3 years to the day that he signed with Indiana. So Johnson had played out of his mind, but he wasn't the only one. Over in the Western Conference, there was another player having the best series of his career. Bonzi Wells spent his first 5 seasons with the Portland Trail Blazers, working his way into a starting role as an effective scorer and hustle rebounder, before eventually being traded to the Grizzlies in December of 2003. Then during the 2005 offseason, Wells was traded to Sacramento, where he would have a great 2005-06 season, albeit limited by injury. But where he would really shine is in the Kings' first-round playoff series, where they would have the tall task of trying to defeat the defending champion San Antonio Spurs. And that's what most people were expecting. Game 1 wasn't even a competition. The Spurs steamrolled the Kings. Wells played solid with 12 points and 6 boards, but he was one of Sacramento's top players, and performances like that weren't going to make a difference. But performances like Wells had in Game 2 absolutely were. Wells attacked the rim, dropping a team-high 28 points, and was an extremely active rebounder, pulling down 12 boards, with nearly half of those coming on the offensive glass. The Kings got contributions from everywhere, but Wells especially stood out because of his effort. He had 19 first-half points as the Kings held a lead after 2, and after 4, they were tied. The Kings were heading to overtime, but they were without Wells, who had fouled out in the final seconds of regulation. And without his relentless play, the Spurs ran away with it in overtime. The series would resume in Sacramento, with San Antonio holding an unsurprising 2-0 lead. And Wells knew that the only chance the Kings had is if they were just as aggressive back at home. Wells definitely practiced what he preached. He dropped 19 points and pulled down a game-high 14 rebounds, an impressive double-double. Even more impressive was that he would have had a double-double even without a single defensive board, as the 6'5" Wells finished the game with 10 offensive rebounds, giving a Kings team who shot below 43% from the field the second chance opportunities that they desperately needed. It was anyone's game down to the final seconds. but an 8-point fourth quarter from Wells helped keep Sacramento in it, and Kevin Martin capped it off.
Not close, stolen by Bibby. Ahead to Martin, to the rim. And the Sacramento...
The Kings had won Game 3, but barely. Then Game 4 ended. The Kings had won, this time convincingly. And who had led the way? Bonzi Wells. A near-perfect performance saw Wells get to the rim at will, dropping 25 points while missing just 2 of his 11 shots. But with just 3 offensive rebounds, the Spurs made sure he wouldn't beat them again on that end. So in response, Wells did the same, pulling down 14 defensive rebounds. His final stat line: 25 points and 17 rebounds, with 3 steals to boot. And the Spurs couldn't ignore it. Tim Duncan knew that focus number 1 going forward would be to slow down Bonzi Wells. But for now, the Kings had taken care of business. It was a 2-2 series. Yet Wells wouldn't be hearing any Bonzi chants in Game 5. Well, Duncan and San Antonio didn't really follow their plan. Wells just kept having his way with the Spurs. In a hostile environment, Wells drops a game-high 38 points on 65% shooting and stays just as active on the glass with 12 boards, also a game high. And you'd think an inspired performance like this would equal a win. But outside of Wells and Ron Artest, the Kings didn't put up much of an effort, with the third quarter being the difference maker. Wells dropped 10 points, but the Kings put up just 22 in total, and San Antonio outscored them by 15, so the game was over at that point. The focus was initially to stop Wells, but that wasn't going to happen. So San Antonio decided to focus on everyone else. They knew one man wasn't going to beat them. Then the series came to an end in Game 6. A quieter performance from Wells still saw him put up 17 points and 11 boards. But San Antonio spent the whole game building up a lead, ultimately winning by 22 points. It was the expected outcome in a series that did not go as expected. But Wells had balled out to end a contract year. In the offseason, the Kings offered him $36 million over 5 years. Yet Wells said no, and ultimately would settle for $5 million over 2 years with the Rockets. But now let's check out another guard who impacted his team with more than just scoring in a conference finals matchup over 15 years earlier. Jeff Hornacek is perhaps best known as John Stockton's backcourt mate in Utah, but the early years of his career were spent on some great teams in Phoenix, and the 89-90 season would be a breakout year for Hornacek. Acting as the team's starting 2-guard, he turned in one of the highest scoring seasons of his career, on a career-high shooting percentage, and he kept that incredible season going throughout the playoffs, eventually helping the Suns reach the conference finals to take on the Portland Trail Blazers, where Hornacek would play probably the best all-around series of his career. Over the first 2 games, Hornacek's scoring was modest, dropping 14 in Game 1 and 13 in Game 2. Not all that impressive, but if you expand the stat sheet, you see that he was also averaging 6 rebounds and 5 assists in that time, and he was active enough on defense to record 2 steals in both games. Unfortunately, careless mistakes led to a Game 1 loss, and a Phoenix collapse resulted in an 0-2 hole for the Suns. However, their losses were by a combined total of 3 points, so with the home crowd behind them and a couple bounces going their way, maybe they could swing the momentum. But Hornacek would also have to continue playing well. Phoenix wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. After beginning Game 3 with a 40-point first quarter, they kept their foot on the gas, and by the end of the third, they had opened up a 43-point lead, completely embarrassing the Blazers. And Hornacek was incredible: 17 points on 8 of 10 shooting, 5 rebounds, and 8 assists. And not only did he record 2 steals for the 3rd straight game, but he also helped hold Clyde Drexler to just 11 points. And Hornacek made it clear that the Suns never lost confidence in their ability. It was just a matter of executing, and they had executed to the fullest, putting themselves back into the series in commanding fashion. Game 4 was closer, but like Game 3, Phoenix stayed aggressive and pulled away in the third. The series was tied. Kevin Johnson and Tom Chambers were the Suns' top players, but Hornacek continued his quietly consistent series with 16 points, 6 boards, and 3 assists. And both of the Suns' 3-pointers were drained by Hornacek. With the way they were playing, it seemed like the Suns would be representing the West in the NBA Finals. It looked like they had it figured out, but playing in Portland continued to pose problems. A high-scoring Game 5 affair saw Hornacek finish with 17 points and 10 assists, one of 3 Suns to record double-doubles. And it was a great performance from Phoenix nearly all game, but there was just something about playing in Portland. A failed Dan Marley drive in the final seconds, followed by a Hornacek foul, allowed Portland to pad their small lead at the free throw line. The clock hit 0, and the Blazers were victorious. Phoenix had lost their 21st straight game in Portland, and were hoping they'd get a chance to break that streak if they could make it to a Game 7. The Suns needed everything they could get to stay alive, but in the second quarter, they lost Kevin Johnson to a hamstring injury, and Jeff Hornacek knew he had to provide the offense. Hornacek would take on the point guard role and become nearly unstoppable. He dished 6 assists as a point guard should. He forced 4 turnovers on defense. But KJ was a scorer, and Hornacek did his best impression, not only dropping a postseason career-high 36 points, but driving to the hoop and getting to the line as well, 14 times to be exact, and making every one of them. Hornacek kept them in the game. Then with Phoenix down 1 in the final seconds, they went to Tom Chambers, but it was a turnover. Drexler free throws pushed the Blazers' lead to 3, and a slightly premature runner from Hornacek was no good. Season over. The second straight conference finals loss for Phoenix. And while Hornacek would continue to have playoff success throughout his career, a championship would always elude him. And now let's shift to another player who always stepped up come playoff time, and was also trying to make his first NBA Finals appearance in 1995. Avery Johnson is one of the most underrated playoff performers of all time. Never a star, the little general was a guy you could count on to effectively run your offense with minimal mistakes, spending his best years as the starting point guard of the San Antonio Spurs during the mid to late 90s. The first 5 years of Johnson's career saw him bounce around teams while making a few stops in San Antonio, but during the 94 offseason, he would again sign with the Spurs, his 3rd stint with the team. Yet this time, he'd be their starter all season, as the Spurs won 62 games and made it to the Western Conference Finals. Johnson had been playing great all postseason, but now he had his biggest test, a conference finals matchup with the defending champs. Standing at just 5'10", most guards were bigger than Avery Johnson, but Houston's guards were some of the biggest in the league, so Johnson knew immediately that he could exploit the matchup with his quickness. But Houston knew that too, beginning Game 1 by sagging off of Johnson and forcing him to shoot. But when Johnson started hitting his shots, they had to tighten up, and then he went right by them, finishing with 18 points on 9 of 14 shooting, and still getting his teammates involved with 9 assists. But the 6-seed Rockets shocked the top-seeded Spurs with a 1-point win. Then after an ankle sprain limited Johnson to 4 second-half minutes in Game 2, the series was heading back to Houston, with the Spurs in an 0-2 hole. And knowing they couldn't afford to go down 3-0, Johnson played through the pain and played his heart out, finishing Game 3 with 20 points, 13 assists, and no turnovers. Most importantly, he hit 5 of 6 free throws in the final minute to protect the lead and finally get the Spurs on the board. And while Johnson wasn't a marquee player in the league, certain Rockets knew how important he was to the Spurs' success. Then Game 4 would be the most lopsided of the series. Johnson had a solid 14 points and 4 assists, but the game was out of reach by the end of the third. San Antonio had repaid the favor, winning both in Houston's arena, and now had a golden opportunity heading back home, yet one that Johnson knew they had to take seriously. They were still far from being in control. Well, Johnson was right. The Spurs weren't in control before Game 5, and they were even less in control after. Now the Rockets were repaying the favor, embarrassing San Antonio on their home court to take a 3-2 lead. Johnson again played great, with 20 points, 7 assists, and 2 steals, while missing just 5 of his 15 shots. But the overall intensity wasn't there, and San Antonio had lost home court advantage again. Now they needed to win on the road, just to keep their season alive. In Game 6, Avery Johnson played like it was his last. His 19 points tying with David Robinson for the team lead, his 10 assists leading all players. And this game was no blowout, but as the clock ticked down, the Rockets pulled away, knocking off Johnson and the top-seeded Spurs to return to the NBA Finals. And for Johnson and the Spurs, it was an accomplishment to even get that far, but ultimately, a disappointing end. Yet this conference finals performance to cap off a great overall season for Avery Johnson, would secure his place on the Spurs for years to come. So that's who the Rockets beat to return to the NBA Finals. But let's take a look at the performance of a player they went up against in the NBA Finals the year prior. John Starks needs no introduction. The scrappy guard epitomized New York Knicks basketball throughout the 90s, a perfect complementary scorer to Patrick Ewing, and a guy who gave maximum effort on both ends of the floor, which makes it even more unfortunate that when his name is mentioned, a lot of people's first thought is his infamous Game 7 performance in the '94 NBA Finals. But what never gets mentioned is that the Knicks wouldn't even have been in a position to win that series if it wasn't for John Starks. It had been a tough road to the finals for the Knicks, with both their semifinals series versus Chicago and their conference finals series versus Indiana going 7 games. And while Starks was still one of their top players throughout the playoffs, he had really been struggling to find his shot. And after game 1 of their finals series versus Houston, it didn't look like he was going to find it, shooting a terrible 3 of 18 from the field. But he might not have been there mentally. Attending his uncle's funeral the day before the game, obviously a significant loss for Starks, a man who had a profound impact on Starks' life, teaching him that you need to continue going forward even when things aren't going right. And while New York would lose game 1, they lost by just 7 points. So if Starks could get out of his funk and move forward, New York had a real chance. Game 2 came to an end, and the series was tied. And when you look at the differences between Game 1 and Game 2, you had to recognize the play of Starks. Starks would drop a team-high 19 points, shooting nearly 55% while draining 3 triples. But his contributions didn't stop there. He led all players with 9 assists as well, and it was a true two-way performance, with Starks adding 3 steals and a block. Starks had played well enough to earn the praise of his no-nonsense coach, and New York had earned the ever-important road win, with a chance to take a stranglehold on the series back in New York. When Game 3 was over, Starks had 20 points, 9 assists, and 0 turnovers. On the surface, a near-perfect performance, but he had lost his shooting touch again. Starks had underwent knee surgery to repair cartilage in mid-March, not making his return until the beginning of the playoffs. And he still didn't have full strength or confidence in his knee, shying away from aggressively driving to the hoop like he usually would, and instead settling for 3-pointers. Game 3 saw him attempt 9, but he only made 3. Just 2 days after stealing one in Houston, the Knicks gave one up in New York. But again, it was only a 4-point loss, and a pattern was forming. If John Starks hits his shots, the Knicks win the game. Going into Game 6, that pattern had only been reinforced. Starks again went for 20 in Game 4. This time he hit 6 of 11 shots and didn't settle for as many threes. He became more of an aggressor, scoring 11 of his points in the final 5 minutes of the fourth. And the Knicks won by 9, the biggest margin of victory this series would see. And the team was motivated. The New York Rangers had won the Stanley Cup one night earlier. Starks had watched, and he also wanted to feel what it meant to be a champion. Then came Game 5. Starks plays even better. 19 points on 50% shooting, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, and defensively he forced 3 turnovers, even hitting the 3-pointer that would put the Knicks ahead for good. John Starks was New York's key to this series. He had played great, and the Knicks had won both. They had retaken the series lead, 1 win away from an NBA championship, heading back to Houston. John Starks' magnum opus, the greatest fourth quarter of his career. With the championship in their grasp, Starks led the Knicks with 27 points, his highest point total of the postseason. He also added 8 assists and stole the ball twice, and 16 of his points had come in the fourth, single-handedly keeping the Knicks in the game. Yet with less than 10 seconds left, New York was down 2, but they had the ball, and Starks had the hot hand. This was his moment to immortalize himself as a New York sports hero. The shot looked perfect until it was disrupted by the fingertips of Hakeem Olajuwon, falling short of the rim. The legendary defender later saying that he had a hunch Starks would go for it all instead of going for overtime, allowing him to anticipate the shot and get his hand on it. It could have been a storybook ending, yet as it turned out, there was one more chapter, one that Starks wasn't too worried about. After all, this was the type of game everyone dreamed of. The pressure was there, but John Starks wasn't going to let it get to him. The infamous Game 7. John Starks can't make a shot to save his life. 2 of 18 from the field, 11 3-point attempts without a single make. The Knicks lose the game by just 6 points, narrowly missing out on their best opportunity to end a more than 20-year championship drought. And yeah, even just a couple more makes from Starks could have changed everything, but it's taken away from how good of an overall series he had, and how he had scored the way he did against Vernon Maxwell, one of the most relentless defenders in the NBA. Game 7 would forever label John Starks as a choker, but if Olajuwon never blocks that shot, Starks very well could have been labeled a Finals MVP. And I think that's where we'll end it off, on another deep dive into some forgotten playoff performances. Let me know what you think in the comments, what you liked and what you didn't, and drop some suggestions. But for now, thanks for checking out the video, subscribe if you're new, and if you haven't already, take a look at the other installments in this series. See you next time.